So before today's program begins, we should take a moment to acknowledge the land on which UC Davis sits. For thousands of years, this land has been the home of the Patwin people. Today, there are 3 federally recognized Patwin tribes: Cachil-Dihi Band of Wintoon Indians of the Calusa Indian Community, Quetzal-Dihi Wintoon Nation, and Yocha-Dihi Wintoon Nation. The Patwin people have remained committed to the stewardship of this land over many centuries. It has been cherished and protected as elders have instructed the young through generations. We are honored and grateful to be here today on their traditional lands.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. That was Hadley Ward. She's a visitor services student assistant here at the museum. So thank you, Hadley. Okay. Good afternoon. I'm Annabeth Rosen, the current co-chair of the Department of Art and Art History. And on behalf of the faculty and students of the department, a warm welcome to everyone. We are here to mark an auspicious occasion. For today, we launch the public programs of the California Studio. The California Studio, housed in the glorious Department of Art and Art History at UC Davis, one of the most prestigious universities in the country, increasingly known for its expanding commitment to the arts. Today, we have our first ever lecture to launch the series by New York-based multidisciplinary artist Tamar Ettun. Yay. The California Studio brings a group of internationally renowned artists annually to the Department of Art and Art History at UC Davis that, since its founding in 1958, has been a powerful force for the art world to reckon with. We are deeply and profoundly inspired by the generosity of Maria Menanti and Jan Schrem for their awe-inspiring gift. Maria is truly dedicated to UC Davis. Wherever she travels in the world, she is our greatest ambassador. Along with the Menanti Schrems, there are many people to whom we offer our thanks for their hard work and support. I'll tell you who they are. I'll be brief, and we can all salute them together. This program would not exist without the creative and steadfast commitment of Ken Monins. Ken, we are most appreciative. You are a wonderful partner to work with. Thank you. My unparalleled colleagues in the Department of Art in Art Studio, Professors Young Su, Shiva Mahdi, Tim Hyde, Gina Werfel, Robin Hill, Hearn Pardee, Darren Martin, and Graham McDougall. And Graham will introduce Tamar Ettun in just a few moments. To our advisory board of the California Studio for their perceptive skills and excellent advice, Ralph Hexter, Ari Kelman, Mikhail Villalobos, who is also here this afternoon, Branwyn Opako, founding director of the Menanti Schrem Museum, and our co-sponsor on many events, Rachel Teagle, and curator, Susie Cantor. And to Dean Estella Ataquana, who luckily chose the most fortuitous time to move to UC Davis. To the incomparable triad of Charlene Madison, Karen Ostergaard, and Katie Gruby, whose imagination and expertise have built this program from the ground up. I'm telling you, these 3 women could do anything. You have our deep appreciation and our grateful thanks. At this moment, I'd like to ask Graham to come up and let the program begin.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us. It's my pleasure to introduce Tamar Ettun, our first teaching artist in residence within the California Studio. Tamar is a multidisciplinary artist based in Brooklyn who uses sculpture, video, and performance to explore shared human experience, most recently focusing on empathy and compassion fatigue. Her work is often structured using movement studies, incorporating sculpture, narrative references, folk tales, and short stories that revolve around fictional characters. She's exhibited and held performances at Pioneer Works, Art Omni Sculpture Garden, and PERFORMA, and has received awards from the Pollock Krasner Foundation, Chinati Foundation, and a MacDowell Fellowship. Tamar is also the founder of the artist collective and social engagement project titled The Moving Company, which creates performances in public spaces and works with Brooklyn teens in a program housed at the Brooklyn Museum. Tamar received her MFA from Yale University, where she was awarded the Alice English Kimball Fellowship, and she earned her Bachelor's of Fine Arts from the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem. Please join me in welcoming Tamar Ettun.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Annabeth and Graham, and thank you everyone for coming. I haven't been in a room with so many people for 2 years. So I thought maybe we'll start all by just standing up for a second. Yeah. So this will be short. Yeah. And let's just stand up, and we're all masked, right? We were all kind of isolated for so long. And let's just move our weight from right to left just a little bit. And let's add some breath into this. Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, and as we're all kind of re-emerging after being in, our closed homes for so long, yeah. Let's just move from side to side. And let's see if we can just sense the energy in the room and sense each other and have us all move in unison so that no one is leading, but everyone is leading. And we're going to try and move from right to left, the same direction, and around the same rhythm. Great. And let your arms be really floppy and heavy. Yeah, so there is no muscle, there is no labor at this moment. Awesome. Let's take some big breaths. And listen to the breath of the people that are next to you. Okay, let's shake it up. A small shake. And sit back down. Okay, so I work a lot with movement, making things, moving together, creating spaces for people to interact inside them. And I'm going to talk about trauma, empathy, and healing, how they're all kind of intertwined. It's going to be about an hour, and then we'll open it to Q&A. So I always like to know what I'm getting into, so just to kind of prepare you. So I wanted to start with this picture from me as a little child. I grew up in Jerusalem. I grew up Orthodox, in an Orthodox family. And in school, we had to say prayers 3 times a day. And when I was in 2nd grade, I opened the prayer book, and this prayer that we were saying every day was, "Thank you, God, for not making me a woman." Now, we were an all-girls school, and I knew that I'm not allowed to hug my grandfather anymore because I was a girl and he was a man. I was like, how is that even possible? So I went to my girlfriends, and I asked them what they think, and together we started to rebel. We said, we don't want to say these words in the prayer book anymore. We went to the teacher, and the teacher was like, She went to the rabbi, the only man in the entire school, and the rabbi said that it's okay, and we can use the slightly more liberal version. Instead of "thank you, God, for not making me a woman," we can say, "Thank you, God, for making me the way I am." And I wanted to start this because here, so we used to wear these like long skirts and long sleeve shirts, and every day after school, our little kind of rebel was taking down the socks so that we could show some skin. So I put this just for context, right? Like whenever we see an artist and we don't know where they're from, what is their history, sometimes there are clues that can be very subtle when we try to kind of read the work of art and see what are these structures that they're fighting against, what is this thing that they're resisting. So when I brought this piece that I made it as an undergrad student. And I like to start with it also because we are in a school. And when I started art school, so I stopped being observant or religious in the same sense anymore. And the art school was still in Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem has a lot of history. It's holy for Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. And there is like all these layers of religions and of stories and importance and tension and wars in that city. And the city where there is culture and museums and galleries was mostly in Tel Aviv. Now, I rarely went to Tel Aviv, like it was maybe a few times in my life. So one day, without telling anyone, I woke up in the morning and in Jerusalem, and I just started walking on road number 1 on the highway all the way until I got to Tel Aviv. So it's about 60 kilometers. I was in much better shape than I am now. It was something like 13 hours. And I think there was kind of like the desperation of just kind of making it through this highway that led me. And the first time it was a secret. I didn't tell anyone. And then I decided to make this into a structure of an art piece. So every month on Saturday, I would wake up and I would go from Jerusalem to Tel Aviv. Now, in ancient times, there used to be this ritual of walking up to Jerusalem. So Jews from all over the world would pack up their bags, take their families, take their donkeys, and for months they would go all the way up until they arrived to Jerusalem, to the temple, to celebrate together. And what I did was doing the same walk. I mean, not the same walk, they didn't go to Tel Aviv, but the same walk from Jerusalem, but in the opposite. So instead of going up to Jerusalem, going down from Jerusalem to what I thought would be like art. And after doing this for a few years, I started making the standing prayer. So the very same prayer that as a young child I resisted and I thought it was wrong, I wanted to do, I took a rope with me and I climbed on these different constructions and poles. And I did the same choreography of the prayer, but this time when my legs were against these poles so I could look at the sky. So I thought this would be kind of like an immediate connection between me and what is above. And around the same time, I was after I came to New York for a students exchange, and I went to Cooper Union, and I saw all these amazing pieces of Trisha Brown and Yvonne Rainer and all these artists from the 70s that did this performance art outdoors. And Trisha Brown, her piece that there is a man walking down the building, if you know that, that was one of the inspirations for this. Okay, I'm going to keep going. The videos that are in the presentation are all in my website. Okay, so then I moved here and I started making these environments that are often from a hot air balloon or parachute fabrics or these large textiles that people can exist inside. This piece was called Empties also, and here I collaborated with Emily Coates. Emily was one of Yvonne Rainer's, or is one of Yvonne Rainer's dancers. And she was also a ballerina in the New York City Ballet for many years. And I was trained as a sculptor, so I made this installation. But what I was interested in is how a sculpture can actually fall apart and not stay the same, not be something that is fixed, that is kind of precious in a way, but there were, like, you could take out this pole and move it there, and you can take out these wheels. So there were all these kind of hidden secrets that the sculpture throughout the performance constantly changed. And Emily, who had all this history of dance and all this love for this genre that is ephemeral, created these dances that were very famous. For example, Trio A of Yvonne Rainer, but she did them on the installation. Because she made them on the installation, people recognized that, in a sense, they were eternal, right? Because you see this thing, you recognize that it exists in the space without the need for time. And then there were these other moments that were like sculptural moments in which her body, together with the installation, kind of became one, and she stayed in them for long durations of time. So this thinking about the body that is still, that stays in one position for a long time, to me, it kind of connected to these thoughts about trauma, right? So when someone goes through a traumatic event, whenever you go back in your mind to this trauma, it stays fresh. So right now, we're all collectively going through this traumatic universal event, right, that we're still wrestling with. There is still no ending. It's probably going to take us many years to understand how we responded to that. But I wanted to start by reading this piece from The Body Keeps the Score. So can someone maybe from the first line read it? Yes, please.
Traumatized people chronically feel unsafe inside their bodies. The past is alive in the form of gnawing interior discomfort. In order to change, people need to become aware of their sensations and the way that their body interacts with the world around them. When our senses become muffled, we no longer feel fully alive.
Thank you. So, I mean, I wonder if this is something that resonates with you, right? After this year and a half or almost 2 years of not being fully able to communicate or to move as freely and to go through a lot of anxiety and all these fears that we are experiencing. What is our relationships to our senses these days? So with that in mind, I mean, pre-pandemic, but with this thought of how our bodies respond to trauma and how can we kind of move and create these spaces that are all about this sensory saturation, I started working with these hot air balloons. This is Natasha Corby, this is a performer, and I worked with balloons for maybe 4 years where I would bring them, would either inflate them in the gallery or outdoors in parks, and people could go inside them, so the balloon is tilted, people could go inside them and experience the performance. And after working with balloons for a long time, I wanted to create something that is more of my own, right? Like working with found objects, you're always, the object is what kind of determines it can smell, especially when it's an object that has been outside, right? An outdoor object is hard to bring indoor. And I wanted, again, to create something, to create an object, to create a sculpture, but that will have this kind of movement embedded in it. So I grew up with 2 siblings that had cystic fibrosis, which is a lung disease. And again, we're all thinking now about breath and about our lungs. I wanted to make a sculpture that is kind of like lungs, that is breathing. And also that has a connection to the senses. So the sculpture has this inflator right here that constantly pushes air inside. And then the audience can go inside it and be immersed in this environment of a color, there is this sense of wind, this like slow movement, and both create relationships, right? There is a sense of being connected to whoever is with you in that space. And also lose orientation a little bit because of the shape and the way that the object is constructed. So I made them one each year. I started in 2015, and I made one last summer. And some of them were very large, like this one, that could host groups of people inside it. And whenever you go in, you take off your shoes, and the fabric also kind of it has the memory of the people that were in it, right? Like every object that you will make that is participatory will always have some kind of wear and tear. But it has a memory also. That's part of the beauty of the object. And then this one that is a smaller, which is a meditation space for up to 2 people. So 1 or 2 people can be inside it. And this is called Samar Tanajir. So this is also, it has this kind of like a bird shape to it. The shapes that I was making were all connected to these cone shapes that the first hot air balloons were built around. So the most basic shape that can actually fly. Okay, so we talked a little bit about trauma and how that affects our senses, and then this sense of stillness in the work versus movement, right? We think about the formal sculpture versus performance. And what research says is that trauma also affects our ability to feel empathy towards another. So as you probably heard about mirror neurons, right? The sense that we all mirror each other's bodies. So I see you sitting like this, and immediately my body kind of leans into that direction. And what research is trying to show is that with PTSD or post-trauma, then the bodies would not be as synced, right? So this mirroring does not happen as effectively. So this is a working diagram for the Motherbird Project, a project that they worked on for maybe 6 years. And at the center was empathy. And everything was, how are all these different emotions related to empathy? So there was desire that I also created with yellow, and that was the yellow inflatable and these other performances that I will show. And then aggression, the relationship between empathy and aggression, and then empathy and joy. And then as I was working with the moving company, with this group of performers, with all these emotions, slowly we started realizing that when we're thinking about desire, we're talking a lot about death. When we're thinking about aggression, we're talking a lot about vulnerability. And when we talk about joy, we talk about pain. So then this Jungian idea of the shadow, that everything contains its opposite, that when you talk about joy, you cannot not talk about pain, right? These ideas kind of came very strongly in the work. And at the center, again, there was this idea of empathy. So empathy is divided into 4 categories. One is cognitive, so we can understand the other, right? So let's say my sister calls me and tells me that she lost her job. I would understand that this is painful. The second one is emotional. I will feel her pain. It will be sad to hear that she lost her job. The third one is compassionate. So in compassionate, we're also being driven to help. I'm going to do some phone calls and see if someone has maybe a job that someone can help. And the last one is somatic. And that was the kind of empathy that I was mostly interested in. So somatic empathy is when you see something that happens to someone in front of you and you just sense it with your body. Do you know how, did you experience that, right? Like seeing someone fall off their bike and you're just like, ugh. Or a car accident, or even seeing someone being bullied, or all different types of pain that is inflicted on people, and how our bodies just kind of respond to that. So with that in mind, with this idea of somatic empathy, I created this body of work.
Igale, gale, gale, na. ופרוס חביבי עליי את סוכת שלומך.
So each one of these compositions were kind of like sculptural assemblages, these small sculptural assemblages with the body, with performance that is ephemeral but is captured via video. And the hope was to kind of reach out to the body of the audience, so to the people that are watching it, and that all these sculptures are sensory based, so they're all about how we understand our bodies. And the full video is 6 minutes. Right? And the name, It's Not a Question of Anxiety, is taken from Emmanuel Levinas. And he's saying it's not a question of anxiety, it's a question of horror. And then there was a series of sculptures that, again, kind of was about this somatic empathy, this relationship between the viewer and the piece. And here, this is a boob with a nail, and this is a cast, a plaster cast. This is, we're thinking about empathy and aggression. This is a helmet that has all these screws in it, and the audience was able to wear it, and it's surprisingly heavy because of all the screws. These are these ice skates that are casted in cement that a performer would wear them, and different performers wore them in different times. This is Jayun Lee in this photograph. They weighed more than 100 pounds. So if the performances were usually very long, like about 3 hours. So in the beginning, you would see the performer kind of able to walk, and then as time goes on, the body and the exhaustion becomes a lot more challenging. And this leads me to the Moving Company. So the Moving Company is a performance group that I started 7 years ago, and I had this residency, and as you know, performance is really hard to think about on your own. You often need some people to feed off. I got a residency with a theater, so I had a rehearsal space, and I just wrote an email to everyone I know, and I said, who wants to play? Like, let's meet once a week for a few hours. I'm going to bring a bunch of objects, and let's just start making things together. And the idea was that it will not be a performing group, but it would be just a study group. But then with time, this became something that had kind of like a public-facing element. And the people that were part of the Moving Company were mostly immigrants. So the idea was to talk about these emotions that are, right, like different cultures have a way to talk about desire, to show empathy. But then if each one of us came from a different place, then how can we create kind of like a common ground to talk about through our bodies, through this vocabulary. And the main 3 performers were Ruby Amanze, that was born in Nigeria, Tina Wang, who was also the one with the can, who was born in Taiwan, and Mor Mendel, who is a choreographer that grew up in Israel, that also worked with me on the last piece that I'll show soon. And here you can see there is, like in this bubble, there was one performer, and she stayed in here for 30 minutes, and then her breath kind of filled the bubble. So by the end, the bubble was just full with this kind of air until someone came in and helped her. So all these kind of relationships and communication were part of the work. And with that, I created a series of videos. This is a really short excerpt from Part Blue, which dealt with grief. So you see this kind of giant balloon becomes a creature that the performer is trying to control, but it will also never be really controlled. And then there is a person dragging a stretcher with another person on top of it. And there is this kind of storytelling of a family, but with these creatures that are all covered, so you can't really see their faces. Oh. And another thing that I've been working with a lot is horizontal totems. So you all know what a totem is, right? Which is vertical. So what I was trying to do is to take this totem, but then flip it on its side, so that instead of this kind of like climbing up and capitalism, there is a shared sense of resources. So something that is more spread out. And I made it like in super basic ways, right? And these are two gloves that are casted in plaster with a banana, hands holding a banana. And then with these, again, sculptural arrangements that have a series of casts in them with found objects. And then also in performance. So here there are all these tomatoes that are held between the performer's legs. So this was, again, we're thinking about empathy and this kind of like support system that if one of these performers is either smushing too hard or letting loose, then the tomatoes would just fall. And then this was with thinking about empathy and desire, right? So there is a piece of fabric that is stretched around all the performers' bodies. And the kind of task was how to hold this fabric taut, but then also move in sync, all of us. And each one of the performances started with this kind of like a formal sculpture of a horizontal totem. So this is like a fish, and this is a fish bowl, and we stayed like this for a long duration. So for like 5 to 10 minutes, often the positions were hard to hold. And then the performances often would also end with a horizontal totem. And a lot of the performances were happening in public spaces. So this is Bryant Park. And the idea was that the performances are free, they're accessible. So we had our audience come in, but then there were always people that were just passing by and like seeing this odd thing that was happening. And with that, we did a social project in Brooklyn, in our neighborhood in Crown Heights, with the Mediation Center, which was a center that teens come to a few times a week, and they get paid for their time. And we came once every 2 weeks and did workshops. So exactly the same thing that we did amongst ourselves, we did with the teens. And then they would make their inflatables, they made their costumes, they made masks. And this is from a performance they did at the Brooklyn Museum. And on the left is this zine with interviews and photographs of the teens. Okay, and then this is Dead Sea. So after working with the moving company for many years, I wanted to do things that are more personal. And the moving company still exists. It's a really beautiful thing. Rebecca Priestop and Laura Bernstein, there's 2 other artists, are still running it. And now it functions more as a platform to present other artists' work, people that make performances. So they just did the Flower Festival with Essex Flowers, this gallery in New York. But the idea of this community that just like kind of keeps going. And I started being more interested in making, right? After many years of doing these productions and collaborating with people, I wanted to be in the space of making the objects. So these are all these dyed fabrics. My class, we just did a bunch of dyeing the last few weeks. So this is parachute fabric that is being dyed. And parachute fabric resists dyes, right? This would not be the ultimate fabric that you would dye with. And that was really interesting for me, right? Like, how would you take material that is already coated, that has like all this resistance, and then when you put it in the dye bath, when you do all these techniques, and what is the color that comes out at the end, right? Because there will be like much less control over the finished product, and the color is kind of faded. But the faded element of it was really interesting for me. And this is an, okay. So this piece is called Dead Sea, and it had 3 lifeguard stations. And you can see this is the 2nd floor. So the lifeguard stations were corresponding to the 2nd floor level. And then there was these 3 giant sails that were all hand dyed with this parachute fabric. So the parachute fabric is a metaphor for the military and war and violence, and then the dyeing techniques, which is associated with like women's work and washing and cleaning and sewing. So it kind of transformed the fabric in a way. And for me, this was a metaphor for healing. So this is the view from the 2nd floor, where you could see kind of like above the ground. This was a fake sea. So here you could see kind of like the water. And then when you went inside it, you could experience the below the surface, which is where the performance took place. And the main theme for this piece was thinking about sexual violence in the army. So there were these 3 lifeguards that they started leading the audience to go downstairs. And then inside there was this fictional character called Abigail that had these kind of different movements that again were connected to these tics that happen after trauma and all these ideas around anxiety and also play. And this is more Mendel. So one of the performers was tied and hanging all the way from the ceiling. This is like a giant building, very tall ceilings. And then she would draw on the floor. And the sound was created by Helado Negro, which is a recording of all we recorded the performances, how we were working with the objects, the sensations of this kind of material, the textiles, how they sound, and we sent it to him, and then he created the sound rec out of that. So it was kind of like another assemblage.
None of them has dreamt yet of a herd of deer running in circles around Jericho, waiting for the walls to fall.
This is a hammock that's made out of speaker cables that played the sound of the sea.
Abigail had time.
And then at the very end of the performance, the sails collapsed, and then we would bring them back up. So I wanted this piece to work both as this installation and had this a performance component to it. Okay. And then after making many years of work about empathy and thinking about empathy, suddenly I had an empathy crisis. And does it ever happen to you that you were so convinced of something and then you're like, oh, actually it's really wrong? I saw Brett Kavanaugh, right? That was when he was testifying before he became a Supreme Court judge, and I have, like all the objections and to anything that he represents. But I saw him cry on the stand, and my first response was empathic, and then I was like, how could that be? Like, how could I have this empathic response to someone that I disrespect so much? And then I realized that maybe empathy, right? Remember the diagram, how everything has like an opposite or a shadow side? Maybe empathy actually has a shadow side. And one of it would be empathizing with like something that is not ethical. So I started thinking with that in mind. And when I was working on that, I was in a residency in Mocha, Tucson. Like, it was the last thing I did before the pandemic hit. And it was an old fire station. The museum is an old fire station. And I was staying on the 3rd floor, and there were many ghosts there. There was like a deserted museum that you sleep inside. And one day, Lilith, this mythological demon, came to me. And as you can see, this is how she's usually depicted. She's holding these ropes, and she has these 2 lions and 2 owls next to her. And I started learning about this project, about this ritual that people used to do in ancient Babylon that was really fascinating to me. So what people would do is they had these ceramic bowls, and when someone was in pain or was sick, they would go to an artist magician, and they would tell them, who is this demon that is hunting them? And the story had to be very specific. It couldn't just be any kind of demon. You had to tell them what it is that you're feeling right now and try to visualize them. And the artist would then draw the picture of that demon, and they would write a spell around the demon, and together they would make these, you see how the demon is tied? They would make these chains so that the demon is trapped. And then they would go to the sick person's home, and they would turn this bowl upside down and trap that demon. And then the demon would not bother you anymore. And when I learned about that, it was just really fascinating, because I thought this was kind of like a very early example of a trauma medicine, right? Like, you tell someone your story, there is like a kind of conversation, a visual representation, and then the sick person, they actually stay with that demon, but they end up being healed or feeling better. So I invited volunteers to come to the museum, and I started weaving around their bodies. So these are these old ropes, also from the sea, continuing with this kind of thinking about water as a metaphor for both danger and healing. And it's a very intimate process, right? You weave on top of someone. It takes many, many hours. You really get to know them. There is this sense of like being trapped. Sometimes it's hard to get the head out. And then there is this vessel that remains. So this is one of the people. They go by M. And the idea of the ropes, sorry if I didn't mention it, is that it's tied, right? So like the first Lilith is holding these ropes, then Lilith is depicted with these chains, and then I made these ties on top of people. And then the pandemic hit. So what I did was, there are hundreds of these bowls, and I just started redrawing, learning the handwriting of these artists from the 2nd to 6th century in Babylon, and learning how they made their demons. What did their demons look like? And the demons always looked kind of friendly, which was very interesting for me, right? Like, if you think about like the scariest thing that you that might hunt you. But then I started adding these textiles, because this is kind of the way I have been working. And these are just a few examples. And another thing that was interesting is that so this is the 2nd century in Babylon, which is today's Iraq or Iran. It's just on the border. And it's the same time as the Babylonian Talmud, which is like the most extensive piece of Jewish law was signed, and is also all the rabbis that are mentioned and that did this work were all men, and the bowls, this kind of like esoteric ritual that was this healing ritual was mostly done by women. And with the pandemic, I started this texting project. So people, Lilith has a text group, and you summon her, and then she sends a text, now about once a month, because she's been very busy. She has a lot of monsters to deal with. But in the pandemic, she sent like once a week a drawing and some kind of somatic exercise, and people would answer Lilith and have like their own relationships, which was a really fascinating thing to observe. And then this is from the Chinati Foundation last summer. So there were so many demons around the last year and a half. This is a space that Donald Judd designed, and I took all their silverware, all their plates, and there were hundreds of them. And every morning on sunrise, I would go with Lilith, and we would turn all these bowls around, and we would trap demons. And that was part of a video that I hope to continue here. So again, going back to the shadow side of empathy and thinking about these like demons that kind of let loose and make these things maybe a little more accessible, can someone read about compassion fatigue? And we're nearly at the end. Yes, thank you.
Compassion fatigue in the general public. The experience of any empathetic individual who is acutely conscious of societal needs but feels helpless to solve them.
Thank you. So part of the dark side of empathy, or the shadow of empathy, is with thinking about compassion fatigue, and I'm sure that a lot of you kind of that resonates. There were a time, I feel like in the past year and a half, that there was just like every day there was like a terrible thing happening in the world, all over the world, both on a personal level with like friends calling and on the news. And it's just really hard to set up boundaries, right? It's really hard to soak it in or not. So with thinking about empathy, and my understanding of the shortcoming of empathy was from compassion fatigue, from non-ethical empathy, and then from this tribal identification. So people would empathize more with people that they see as similar to them from their in-group and not from their out-group, which is also this huge problem. And this is the very last thing. So I never showed this. This is like work in progress. And a lot of these, so I said that there was a spell. There was always a spell on the bowl. Even if the people did not know how to read and write, they still felt that they need to make the shapes of words so that there would be some kind of a spell, because there is some magic power to letters. So I created the bowl just on my pregnant belly. And a lot of these were related to pregnancy and giving birth and miscarriages and difficulty getting pregnant, and all these themes that are often not really discussed. So this is, while I'm here, I hope to keep working on this video, and then I'm making a giant tent for Lilith to exist inside. So thank you so much. Am I on time? On time.
That I was interested in both as an art studio major and a psych major. I typed it out. So I was curious to know about how empathy relates to the art and the prose So would you like say that these colors are unique to you, or are they like more universally accepted?
The what?
Would you say that the colors that you used are more unique to you, or you like universally accepted? And then I noticed that a lot of the colors were like primary colors. So I didn't know if that signified like primary emotions, because I noticed that the aggression one was like magenta, and the aggression was kind of like a secondary emotion. So I was just, kind of curious, and the way that they were arranged, does that signify anything? Do you put light colors next to each other? Do you vary them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I gave myself the liberty to choose whatever color I thought was associated with this emotion. But then I realized that there is some kind of, like, I don't know, like universal subconscious or something, that there are all these correspondence, right? Kabbalah, like Jewish mysticism, has this like color chart that is very much like the chakra system, and that was just like really interesting. And then with this pink, with this magenta that was related to aggression, I was thinking a lot about gender, right? And actually the pink color had this historical transformation throughout time, because pink used to be boys' color before World War II, and then became color that is associated with femininity. So that was really interesting, and there are all these like biological effects of pink. There is this Baker-Miller pink, which is a kind of shade of pink that lowers aggression. That if you're exposed to that color for like 15 minutes and then you try to arm wrestle, you're actually weaker than you were before. So there were just like each year and its colors had a lot of research into what the color is, what are some other cultural associations. But the choosing of the colors were like just my immediate impulse. Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, my question is, how did you find an audience that really like appreciated and connected with your work? Like, was it through social media or something else?
Another great question. Yeah, I don't know. I think when I was younger, I just wanted to do things. I just wanted to do the thing and not think so much about everything else. And then with the moving company, things just happened kind of naturally because we were performing, and then people would come to see us. And in the beginning, I was terrible with like writing the right time and I don't know, things like that. Social media is a great tool, I think. Obviously, it's also a terrible tool. It is very accessible. I guess that's what's cool about it. It's a way for people to get in conversations that they might have not been part of. So that's what's good about it. But there were all these research about like Instagram like makes people suicide. So yeah, I don't know if I recommend that. Yeah, but finding an audience is always hard. I think part of it is just the community you live inside, and then things go from there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm curious about your relationship with the Dead Sea, both presently and your personal history with it, and how that relates to the work that you do about it. If you wanted to talk a little bit about that performance and your relationship
To talk more about Dead Sea. Yeah. So for Dead Sea, there was this fictional character called Abigail, and there were 4 short stories that I wrote about her. And then we created, so each one of the short stories had like a sculptural moment. So again, all my performances always start with this like still moment, still composition. And there was a lot of collaboration with the choreographer, with Moore Mendel, with kind of thinking about these stories and then making them into life and then creating the objects that will go with it. So I was like really nerdy with the colors, and there is the moment where they throw all the ping pong balls. So each one was painted in a different shade of orange, because orange was kind of the theme of that year. Sorry, do you have, or just to talk in general about the performance, or?
Oh,
I was also just thinking about your personal relationship to the Dead Sea, maybe even, and how that performance was.
Oh, the Dead Sea, like the lowest place on earth, and yeah, got it. Yeah, I think I like the name, right?
Was
Yeah.
the photo taken by the Dead Sea that you showed in the beginning of the slideshow?
No.
Just curious.
Yeah. I mean, the Dead Sea is a really special and beautiful place. Yeah. I think it's probably very evocative to a lot of artists. Sigrid Lando made like all her pieces there, and yeah.
I have a question about your jacket that you wore here. Was it something you designed? Was it a coat that you cut up? Where did you get the beautiful fabric? Do you wear it?
Oh, this is the best question. Well, so I actually have a friend that knew that I, like fabrics, and she got this coat on like a sale to cut it to make something on her couch. And then she just gave it to me in pieces, and I saw it, and I was like, this is so cool. I'm just gonna reattach it and wear it. So I decided to wear it instead of making art with it. Yeah.
Yes, hi. Thank you for the presentation and
Thank you.
sharing this wonderful art of your work. I did have a question about sort of the financial infrastructure that you have found your work. And you mentioned at one point sort of working with these teenagers, these youth, who are getting paid to be on this project and session. I was just wondering if perhaps you could speak a little bit more about sort of the various networks of foundations and fundings that you had to navigate through in doing your art practice, and how this has sort of shaped a lot of your projects and your practice itself.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. It's a really, really important question that is often not being discussed. How everything was funded. So I wrote a lot of grants because there were a few of us, and we shared the responsibility of writing grants. The teens that were getting paid, there was another organization, the Mediation Center, that's their project, but we just offered this other service. And then we talked to the Brooklyn Museum to do because the space where they were doing it was not good for movement, then the museum, when it was closed, they allowed us to come and just rehearse in the galleries, and then that led after to the performance. Funding the work with performance is really complicated. It's a really important and complicated topic. Yeah, so thank you for bringing it, especially in the context of art school. I mean, the amazing thing about being in art school is that you can, collaborate with your friends. What happened with the moving company is also that after, doing it for a long time, then suddenly a few of us started having babies, and people started moving, and then do we pay for rehearsals, or do we pay just for performances? And we never charge money, because that was, like, a lot of us grew up without access to museums, and that was really important to make work in public space for people, like me, that didn't grow up with access to a museum. They didn't grow up learning these things. So that was really complicated, right? So there was a lot of grant writing, and then some fundraising, and then when you work with institutions, then they usually fund the work. Yeah, but getting to that level, that took like a ton of work. Yeah. But what I do now, like working with yourself, working with yourself is for sure easier. Yeah. You can take yourself out for a nice brunch and you'll feel great. It's cheaper.
Hi, thank you for the presentation. I'm right here. I have a question about your piece, The Moving Company. I noticed that there are a lot of everyday objects used in the choreography. I'm curious about whether they have like the reason why they're chosen specifically? Do they have any significance to the performers or to yourself? And the reason why they are placed in the way that they are?
Like what? Can you give me, like the tomatoes or?
No, the piece, the moving company, where the performers are kind of like laying down a table and they're kind of like connected to each other.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think one of them has like their foot on a hula hoop.
Right.
Circle.
Yeah. So they were mostly domestic, like stuff that you would find at home. Again, we're talking about funding and money. They were relatively inexpensive, and the shape. So they were all related to home, sometimes to cleaning, a lot of gloves, and then the form. So that's why the hula hoops and yeah.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So a lot of your projects like the Dead Sea, what was the cradle to grave time that it took to put all that together?
Yeah, Dead Sea took like 2.5 years. Really, like, it was a long time. Yeah, a lot of labor. And then it was supposed to tour, and then there was a pandemic, and everything got canceled. But now it's back on.
Thank you, Tamar. That was extraordinary.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
I want to thank everyone for coming this evening, and pay attention to your emails. There'll be lots of invitations and announcements for artists that are coming through the art department and the British Museum, and we hope to see you all back here. Thank you all very much.